Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for your time.
I'm happy to help.
Yeah.
Did I take your seat?
No, I'm gonna sit down.
I know it's nobody else, it's just like going to church.
I'm gonna sit down when
Everybody's
you're
getting
here.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'll give the seat up if you want.
All right, I guess we'll start. Good evening, everybody. I was waiting for Josh to get back. My name is Pat Gear. I'm the Chief of Fisheries Management here, and I will be, I'm going to put my glasses on. I will be your administrative, I am the administrative proxy for the state of Virginia for the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission Striped Bass Management Board, and I'll be your hearing officer tonight. I'd like to introduce a few people. I'd like to introduce my deputy chiefs, Shannon Masden and Joe Grist, and Josh McGilly is in this building somewhere. He's getting someone their striped bass tags right now, so he'll be back in a few minutes. And we have Emily Fonka from ASMFC, and she'll be doing the presentation tonight. The commission staff is going to present the background information and an overview of the proposed options for draft addendum 2. After the presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask clarifying questions and provide public comments. I'd like you to keep your public comments relative to the addendum if you can. If someone wants to go way off into some other obscure area, I might ask you to try to bring it back to the addendum, okay? Because that's what we're here for tonight. This meeting will be recorded. It will be part of the official record. Each person who wants to provide public comment will be given the opportunity to speak. When we ask for a question or provide comments, please state your name, the state you're from. We'd like to hear what city you're from as well. And then you'll be recorded. We'll hand the mic to you so we can hear loud and clear. I don't know if you've ever been in this room when we've had board meetings, you really can't hear, so we got brand new mics, so we can do that. Provide whatever organization you're with as well, and if you're acting for someone, I know some folks could not be here tonight because they had COVID, so they have someone speaking on their behalf. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily, and she can begin the presentation. Thank you.
Great. I need this mic. All right. So thank you all for being here tonight. For those I haven't met, my name is Emily Franca, and I am the Fishery Management Plan Coordinator for striped bass at the Commission. I'll be going over the draft addendum 2, the management options, and then we'll get into the public comment. I'll also do a quick overview of the Commission itself up front. And again, I just want to say we really appreciate your time being here tonight. So just a quick overview on the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission before we get into the document draft addendum 2 tonight. So the commission was formed back in 1942 as an interstate compact between the 15 Atlantic coast states from Maine down through Florida. And the commission is the forum for all those states as they're working to manage species in state waters, which is 0 to 3 miles from shore. And each state is represented on the commission by 3 commissioners, but each state does only get 1 vote in the decision-making process. So on this striped bass management board specifically, there are 16 voting members. Those include the states from Maine down through North Carolina. It also includes the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, the District of Columbia, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Marine Fisheries Service. So getting into draft addendum 2, and just to remind folks, if you didn't see when you walked in on the back table, there's a handout that has all of the options in there, so feel free to take one with you when you leave tonight. So just a little background on how we got here, why we're looking at this draft addendum 2. A couple years ago, the 2019 benchmark stock assessment for striped bass found that the stock was overfished, and that triggered a provision in the management plan which requires the board to rebuild the stock to its biomass target within 10 years, so by 2029. That assessment also found that the stock was experiencing overfishing. So in response to that, back in 2020, the board implemented Addendum 6, which was that 18% reduction, and the board has maintained those measures for the last few years. And then last year, we got the next stock assessment, the 2022 stock assessment update, and that found that the stock is still overfished, but no longer experiencing overfishing based on 2021 data. A couple months later, we were able to develop some new projections that were based on 2022 data to give us a more updated picture of where things were. And those new projections found that we actually have a very low probability of rebuilding the stock if the high fishing mortality that we saw last year in 2022 were to continue. So that low probability of rebuilding is really due to the increase in striped bass removals that we saw last year in 2022. So striped bass removals increased by about 32% last year relative to the prior year, 2021. And this was driven by an increase in the recreational sector. Specifically, recreational harvest increased by about 88%. This is coast-wide. And then recreational live releases increased by about 3% relative to 2021. And there was much more of an increase in the ocean relative to the Chesapeake Bay. And this large increase that we saw in the ocean recreational harvest is likely due to the strong 2015 year class, those age 8 fish becoming available to the ocean slot. So a lot of those fish were becoming 28, 29 inches. So they were available to be harvested in the ocean in 2022, which likely led to that huge increase we saw in recreational harvest. On the other hand, commercial harvest was about the same in 2022 as it was in 2021, so no big increase there. So again, those projections indicate that we have a low probability of rebuilding based on that 2022 information. So there's some concern that the Amendment 7 management measures, those measures that have been in place for a couple of years, combined with that strong 2015 year class of fish moving through the fishery, will lead to high catch again next year in 2024. There's also concern that if future stock assessments, like the one coming up, the 2024 assessment, indicate that even more management action needs to be taken, there's some concern that the current addendum process would take too long to respond to those next assessments. So this draft addendum was initiated to address those concerns. So this draft addendum considers options first for recreational and commercial measures to reduce removals to ultimately reduce the fishing mortality. There are also some options that would allow the board to respond more quickly to upcoming stock assessments. And then there's also some options related to requirements for filleting of striped bass. And this draft addendum is intended to build upon the emergency action that's currently in place. So as many of you probably know, earlier this year, the board implemented an emergency action for striped bass recreational fisheries where they implemented a 31-inch maximum size across all striped bass recreational fisheries. So that emergency action is temporary. It's in place for about another year until next October or until this addendum is implemented, so whichever comes first. So again, that emergency action is temporary, and this draft addendum is sort of the more formal way to change the fishery management measures following that emergency action. So here's the timeline for the draft addendum. The board initiated it back in May at the same time that they implemented that emergency action. The document was developed, the board approved it for public comment in October, and we're here in the public comment period, which runs through December 22nd. In January, the board will review public comment, select the management options, and consider approving the addendum. And then the board will also determine by which date the states need to have those measures implemented. So the board will determine when during 2024 or beyond the state should have the measures implemented. So getting into the management options themselves, there are 3 categories, and I'll go into each option. The first are for the recreational fishery, then we'll get into the commercial fishery, and then we'll end with the options related to the stock assessments. So overall, our projections indicate that we need a 14.5% reduction relative to where we were in 2022 in order to achieve the fishing mortality target. So that could look like a couple ways. Each sector, the commercial and recreational sector, could each take a 14.5% reduction. That would get us there. Or if the recreational sector were to take the full reduction, so if the commercial sector took a 0% reduction, the recreational sector would need a slightly higher reduction of about 16%. So for the recreational fishery, as usual, we have separate options for the ocean and for the Chesapeake Bay. And all of these size limit options are designed to reduce harvest. These options are not designed to protect specific year classes. They simply were designed to achieve that % reduction. However, because we're looking at different size limits, some of the options might protect one year class more than another, depending on which size the board goes with. And then something new in this draft addendum that the board has not considered before is considering mode split options, so options that would have different measures for the for-hire modes and then different measures for the private vessels and shore anglers. So in the ocean, the board is considering options that would allow the for-hire modes to have a wider slot limit. And then for the bay, the board's considering options that would allow the for-hire modes to have a higher bag limit. So here on the screen are the ocean recreational options. They're there in the red box. The columns to the right of the red box show the estimated reduction we expect from each option. So that reduction can be broken down by a change in harvest. All of these options would narrow the slot limit, so we expect that harvest would decrease. But we also expect that because we narrow the slot limit, that means that recreational live releases would increase a bit. So that overall reduction incorporates both that reduction in harvest and that increase in releases. So again, this is just for the ocean. So for the ocean, option A is the status quo, which is a 28 to less than 35-inch slot for all recreational modes, one fish bag limit. Option B would be a 28 to 31-inch slot for all modes, still a one fish bag limit. So this option B would essentially be the same thing as the emergency action that's currently in place. Option C would be one of the mode split options. So this option in the ocean would allow a 28 to 31-inch slot for private and shore, and then a 28 to 33-inch slot for hire. Option D would be a 30 to 33-inch slot for all recreational modes. And then option E would be another mode split option. So a 30 to 33-inch for private vessels and shore anglers, and a 28 to 33-inch for the for-hire modes. So all of these ocean options we're estimating get us somewhere between about 12.5% to 14%, depending on the option. So here are the Chesapeake Bay options. Again, they're in the red box. So for the Chesapeake Bay, option A, status quo, is a one fish at 18-inch minimum. As you all are probably aware, many of the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions have conservation equivalency programs in place, which means they were able to implement slightly different measures than this 18-inch minimum. So I know here in Virginia, the minimum size, I believe, is 20 inches, and it's 19 in Maryland. So right now, there's different size limits across all the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions. So that's option A under the status quo. So the alternative options here, the B options and the C options, would propose implementing one bay-wide slot limit. So it would be the same slot limit across all the Chesapeake Bay jurisdictions. So option B1 would be a 19 to 23-inch slot with a one fish bag across all recreational modes. B2 would be a 19 to 24-inch slot, one fish bag for all modes. B3 would be a 19 to 25 slot, one fish bag, all modes. And B4 would be a 19 to 26-inch slot, one fish bag, all modes. And you can see that as that slot limit widens, the reduction we expect is less. So that narrowest slot, we expect about a 22% reduction, versus that widest slot would only be about a 10% reduction. The other types of options are the option C category, and that would be those mode split options that would allow the for-hire mode in the Chesapeake Bay to have a higher bag limit. So C1 would be a 19 to 23-inch slot. It would be one fish for private and shore, two fish for hire. And then C2 would be a 19 to 24, one fish private and shore, two fish for hire. So those are the Chesapeake Bay recreational options. And then if the board does decide to select one of these options where there's different measures for the for-hire modes versus the private and shore anglers, the board would have to decide if they want to clarify how these types of mode split options would apply. So right now, option A, the status quo, the ASMFC fishery management plan doesn't say anything about specific for-hire measures and how those would work. Option B, the alternative here, the board could add a clarifying statement, and that statement would say that for-hire management measures would apply only to patrons during a for-hire trip, and that any captain and crew on a for-hire trip would be subject to the private vessel and shore angler limit. So for example, in the bay, a patron on any for-hire trip could keep 2 fish, but the captain and crew would be under the private and shore limit of 1 fish. And then the last option for the recreational fishery is related to filleting of any recreationally caught striped bass. Several states do allow at-sea or shoreside filleting of striped bass, but there is some concern that this could make it easier for non-compliance to occur. There are specifically concerns about compliance with a maximum size limits in those states that do allow filleting. So the option the board is considering here is whether to put some guardrails around filleting. So if a state were to allow filleting, they would have to meet some minimum requirements. So option A, the status quo, the ASMFC fishery management plan doesn't say anything about recreational filleting. It's completely up to the states whether they want to allow filleting and whether they want to put any requirements around that. So option B would put in place some minimum requirements. So states could still allow filleting, but they would have to have some minimum requirements or sort of these guardrails around filleting. So for striped bass filleting, racks would have to be retained, the skin would have to be left intact, and possession would be limited to no more than 2 fillets per legal fish. Then states could also include other language as they see fit about where to dispose of racks, for example. So that wraps up the recreational options. Moving into the commercial fishery, the options here consider a commercial quota reduction, again, to reduce harvest toward achieving our goal of the fishing mortality target. The quota reduction is not designed to protect specific year classes. It's simply a % reduction off the quota. One thing for striped bass is that a reduction in quota does not always translate to a reduction in harvest, and that's because in some states the quota is not always fully utilized. So those quota underages lead to, if there's a future reduction in quota, there may not be that same reduction in harvest. However, last year, especially in the ocean, many of the states with active commercial fisheries did use all of their quota. So if there was a reduction next year, those states would likely feel an impact this time around. So option A for the commercial quota is continue with the current quotas. Option B would be that quota reduction. So the ocean and or the Chesapeake Bay quotas could be reduced by up to 14.5%. And that's from those 2022 quota levels. And the board would decide exactly what % it could be. So it could be anywhere between 0 all the way up to 14.5. So the board could choose anywhere in between 5, 10, whatever % the board wanted to go with, up to that maximum of 14.5. So here on the screen here, this chart is also in the handout that's in the back. The first column shows the option A status quo, the current quotas by state. You can see I tried to make the Virginia quotas a little bit bigger there. So it's about 125,000 pounds for the ocean in Virginia, and then the total Chesapeake Bay quota across all 3 jurisdictions is about 3 million pounds. So that second column is option B, if the board took that maximum 14.5% reduction. So in that case, the Virginia ocean quota would be about just under 107,000 pounds, and the Chesapeake Bay quota in total would be about 2.5 million pounds. And then the last column there, just for reference, is the commercial harvest from last year. So you can see that Virginia did use most of their ocean quota, and you can see in the Chesapeake Bay used about 80% of their quota last year. And then the last set of options here is related to the stock assessments. So if we have an upcoming stock assessment that indicates the stock is not projected to rebuild by our target rebuilding date of 2029, the board could respond in one of two ways. So option A, the status quo, the board would initiate the typical management document process. So that's like the current addendum process like we're doing now, or an amendment to change management measures. So with that typical process, we have a formal public comment period, public hearings, again, like tonight. But there is concern that that process takes several months. And so any new measures would likely not be implemented until about 2 years after the assessment is complete. So the alternative here is option B, and that is where the board could respond more quickly via board action. So the board could simply vote to change management measures at a board meeting. They wouldn't have to go through that full addendum process. There could still be public comment. Public comment is allowed during the board meetings, and you can send in comments leading up to board meetings, but there wouldn't be a formal public comment period like we're having for this addendum. But this option B would allow the board to respond more quickly. So before we get into questions, I just want to quickly review how you can provide public comment. Being here tonight is a great way. You can also provide comments in writing. The draft addendum in full is posted on our website on the public input page. All the public hearings are posted on our calendar. We have 2 more hearings, including a DC PRFC hearing next week that will be via webinar. And then we also have a recording of these slides on our YouTube channel. And the deadline for all written comments is Friday, December 22nd. You can email those to comments@asmfc.org, or you can send them in via mail to our office. And again, all this information is in the draft addendum on the website, all that. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions if folks have any questions before we get into comments. And again, we'll use the microphones.
Questions, we'll just pass around the mic. Just raise your hand.
Questions on this, Pat?
Huh?
Questions?
Questions on the
No, I
plan.
can't hear.
Questions on the plan.
Yeah. One
Let
thing
me give you
you,
the mic.
I'm very loud, I really don't want to do that. Thank you. One thing you neglected to say when you were talking about the commercial quotas and people going over, there's a direct pound for pound payback. There's never been any payback on the recreational side, and they have never achieved either thing that since you started. Back in the 90s, I was on the ASMFC back in the 90s when it started, and they've never reached either one. Commercial has reached it every time, and there's significant over in Massachusetts last year, but that has to be paid back this year, so you need to tell people that so they don't think that people's going over not paying anything back.
Yep, that is correct. For the commercial fishery, if a state does exceed their quota, they have to pay it back the next year.
We're going right into comments, like I said. Mr. Place?
Yes, kind of following on Ernie's comments there. First, a question. Has the bay fishery, Virginia specifically, ever exceeded its F commercially?
Exceeded the quota.
The F, the allowed mortality rate.
So we only have one fishing mortality rate for the entire coast. So
Right.
we don't have, I can't answer that. I don't know if the Chesapeake Bay fishing mortality has exceeded.
Okay. I guess you haven't taken it down to that level, but for many years, I guess, still I've been on the ACCSP as Virginia's advisor. And every back of the envelope calculation that I've done and looking at the poundage, that we've never been at our F. In other words, we're under quota every single year, and that has served as a buffer for other states and other sectors that have gone over their quota. So a lot of the Virginia watermen feel that considering we've stayed under our mortality rate and have had underages in our landed quota every single year to the tune of cumulatively millions of pounds, that we've kind of provided a buffer for the sectors and the states that have been engaging in overfishing by exceeding the F, or exceeding their quota, or they're exceeding their TAL. So I don't know whether the various reductions you're looking at, and speaking specifically now about the commercial quotas, I don't know whether you're looking to impose an equal percentage, whether it's 0 or 14% across all commercial fisheries, but it does seem that fisheries or sectors, just like people in Virginia that exceed their quota, say individually, they pay it back immediately, as does the state. So it seems kind of unfair that these reductions would take place in a fishery that's been managed in such a conservation risk-averse fashion that we always have an underage. And like I said, that has cumulatively been millions of pounds. And I'm a recreational fisherman too. I've run businesses in the past that serve the recreational fishery. But I am disturbed to see, what, 200% extra F than they were predicted to have. And before we got to what was Amendment, or Addendum 7, or Amendment 7, I guess this is Amendment 2.
Addendum 2, correct.
Amendment 2, Addendum.
Addendum 2
Okay, to Amendment 7.
to Amendment 7, correct.
Before we went to Amendment 7, I think it was Amendment 6, because the MRIP was so inaccurate, there was a 230% overage from the recreational sector that had been going on for years. You may remember that from a few years ago. And I just to cut it short, I do think that it would be nice to see people that have engaged in fisheries that are so tightly controlled that they have an underage every single year, not be penalized for the overfishing of other sectors or other states. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got that down as a comment. And yes, to your point, yes, the Chesapeake Bay quota has not been exceeded, at least for several years.
Okay, does any,
Ever, I don't believe. If there was a year where it was ever met, it might have been 1996.
we can check that. If we've ever gone over our quota, it's been rarely.
Very rare.
Yeah, I've actually checked that several times over the last several decades. That's
Okay.
why I speak like that.
Are there any questions? I knew this was going to happen. We end up going right into comments. Does anybody have any other questions?
I have a question.
Is it a question, Joan?
It's a question. As we make comment, are you going to go through the options and ask for a show of hands?
Yes, so
Thank you.
for the recreational size limits, we can do a show of hands for the ocean options and a show of hands for the Chesapeake Bay options. And then we can do a show of hands for the commercial options as well.
No questions?
About the stock, about the history of the stock, or is that too technical?
Excuse me?
Questions about the history of the stock, is that too technical? It's getting away from questions about.
I mean, if you have a question about the stock, we can try to answer it.
I'd like to know what the stock size was at the end of the moratorium.
Do you have that graph?
Ooh, I don't have that graph on hand here.
We can dig that up. It should be, it's probably in the,
So that's when
it should be actually in the document.
Yes, and I have a,
It's in the document. I can get it to you.
yes.
What is it you're looking for, Pat?
So here, I'll give this, I have a couple copies of this, but the graph here, so the question was, what was the size of the stock after the moratorium? So I'm looking here, so spawning stock biomass in, let's see, we'll say the, early 1990s, mid-1990s, peaked around 200 million pounds. And just for reference, right now we are, I think, around 150 million pounds. So there was sort of that increase for a while, and then it really peaked in sort of the mid-2000s, and then it's been decreasing since then.
So what is it now? What's the total?
So right now, the spawning stock biomass, that biomass of spawning females is about 150 million pounds.
Target.
Well, what's the target? The target is about 202 million pounds. So we're about 50 million pounds below.
You have a question? Okay, it's a question.
Yes, sir, I have a question.
Hi, my name is John Forrest from Burns Island. My question is, what's the total recreational catch in pounds versus the total commercial catch in pounds coastwide?
That's in the document as well,
Coastwide.
in the full document.
So I have it right here in numbers. I can get it to you in pounds as well. But in numbers, commercial harvest last year in 2022 was about 600,000 fish, and recreational harvest was about 3.4 million fish.
So we sell by pounds, not by fish.
Right. Yeah, I can get you those numbers in pounds before you leave.
My understanding, it's about 90% to put it, if you take pounds, because I did look at that, that the total coastwide catch or landings, pound-wise, is about 90% recreational and about 10% commercial. And it's been hovering above and below that for several decades.
Right, so for those that couldn't hear, it's actually in number of fish. We do look at the breakdown of each sector and how they contribute to the removals. So about 90% of the striped bass fishery removals are the recreational sector. That's both harvest and release mortality. And then about 10% is the commercial sector, and that's commercial harvest as well as commercial dead discards.
Has the commercial sector itself ever exceeded itself? Because since they are capped by a hard quota and with a payback provision, it's my understanding that once, say, ASMFC or whoever collaboratively have come up with the targets and the thresholds, that it's only the commercial fishery that hasn't exceeded them.
So for fishing mortality, how that works is we have one coastwide fishing mortality target and threshold, and that's for both the Chesapeake Bay and the ocean and for commercial and recreational. So we can't split out the fishing mortality for each sector, but we have the commercial quota, right? So we can say, each state says whether or not they've exceeded their quota every year. And quota overages have been pretty rare. There were a couple states, I believe in the ocean, Rhode Island and Massachusetts, both exceeded their quota last year. But as was mentioned, those states will pay it back this year.
Kelly, I think you're getting fishing mortality confused with quota. Fishing mortality is a coast-wide number that's all the data combined.
Right.
And we don't have a specific for the bay, and we don't have a specific by sector as well.
Okay, well, in terms of quota or total allowable landings, I actually did look at those numbers, and though there were a couple states, like you just mentioned, I think New York was one that was like 30 or 40,000 pounds over. A couple of the northern states did slightly exceed their quota, but the Bay jurisdictions, Maryland, PRC, and Virginia, and DC, although DC has no commercial fishery, I think it was about 600,000 pounds under, which is far in excess of the cumulative overages from the other states. In other words, then, the commercial fishery as a whole was at least several 100,000 pounds. I think it was about 400,000 pounds under the quota, and presumably the quota is managed by F, the allowable F, although, like you said, it's hard to parse out any from the total F. But presuming that the quotas are based on what would be allowable, it seems logical that we have not exceeded the F that we're allowed. And it's pretty obvious where the excess F has occurred.
Right, and all I can speak to is, based on the quota, you're correct. The quota has not been fully utilized for several years. The quota is typically always underutilized.
Okay, are there any other questions before we go into comments? I have one question. When is the stock assessment due out in 2024?
So next year, the next stock assessment will be available in October 2024, and that will include data through 2023.
We'll probably hear that at the annual meeting then, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right, moving on to comments. I know you all have comments. Some of you have written comments, so raise your hands. We'll start with Mike.
Did you want to do a show of hands first?
Do you want to? Sure, we can do the survey first.
Okay.
We can do that, then we'll go into comments. Is that all right? It's our meeting. It's what we want to do.
All right, we'll just do a quick show of hands on the recreational options, and then we'll do the recreational options and the commercial options, then we can just open it up for comments. So For the ocean recreational options, if anyone would like to do a show of hands, does anyone support for the ocean option A, status quo, 28 to less than 35? Anyone for option B, 28 to 31 for all recreational modes? All right. See 5. Anyone for option C? This would be the mode split in the ocean, 28 to 31 private shore, 28 to 33 for hire. Anyone for option D? 30 to 33 all modes. Anyone for option E? 30 to 33 private shore, 28 to 33 for hire. All right. Moving on to the Chesapeake Bay recreational options. Is anyone for option A? This would be the status quo, what is currently in place. Anyone for option B1? So this would be the narrow 19 to 23 inch slot, all modes. All right. Anyone for B2, 19 to 24, one fish, all modes, okay. B3, 19 to 25, one fish. B4, 19 to 26, one fish. All right, so moving into the C options, these would be the mode splits. So is anyone in favor of C1? This would be the 19 to 23, one fish for private shore, 2 for hire. All right. And then anyone for C2? This would be that slightly wider 19 to 24, 2 fish for hire. All right. And then to close out just the show of hands here, we'll do a quick poll for the commercial fishery. So we have option A, this is status quo, same quotas that are currently in place. How many would be for option A? This would be no reduction. Okay. Okay. And would anyone be in favor of option B? This would be up to a 14.5% reduction. Okay, great. Sure.
Raise your hand if you consider,
Skipped over the fillet last requirement.
I figured the filleting might be better addressed in verbal comments. If you have comments on filleting, we can take those verbally.
Can you just raise your hand if you consider yourself a commercial fisherman primarily? You get that number?
Yep.
So all the recreational fishermen vote to cancel the commercial fishermen. All the commercial fishermen vote to cancel recreational fishermen.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
And the same for recreational. Okay.
Okay.
And I don't think there's another category there, but if there is, raise your hand if you're in another category. Okay.
Great. Thank you all. That was just a quick way to kick off the comments. But yes, we'd love to open it up to verbal comment. When you make your comment, feel free to comment on all of the options. And if it'd be great if you could state your name, where you're from, and if you are representing an organization.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
There you go.
I'll help you out. John Bello, Virginia Saltwater Sport Fishing Association. I'm going to skip over most of the options since we just voted on them. But I do want to say that we have serious concerns on the probability of rebuilding the biomass to the target by the 2029 deadline. The actions that are proposed here in Addendum 2 only project a 14.5% reduction for 2024 versus 2022. We're cognizant that there are other factors such as lack of prey, more specifically menhaden, several years of low recruitment, such as the Juvenile Abundance Index, pre-spawn commercial netting, and the effects of climate change, which all play a role in the rebuilding process. We do not believe the proposed measures will be enough to allow the rebuilding to take place. Moreover, we believe that both the recreational and commercial sectors must share in the responsibility for this rebuilding process. You have my written comments on all the options, plus we just voted. I will say that on the filleting allowance, we do support option B. If a state wants to allow it, put the measures in place. And then there was one other one. In response to the stock assessment, we will support option B, which would allow you to react quickly rather than going through another year-long addendum. And in terms of section 4, the compliance schedule, we support implementation dates being put in place as soon as practicable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Who's next? All the way to the back of the room now. Okay.
How you doing? My name's Keith Bradbury. I'm from Matthews, a commercial water fish. I will agree with that gentleman that just spoke. It needs to be more bait in the bay. You ride the bay, there's nothing. You're riding in a desert. But I would like to see the hook and line guys or the people on it, regular people fishing, give them tags like we got. That way you can keep up with how many fish they're catching, and then they're not limited to one fish. However many tags y'all decide, 10, 20, they can catch them in one day, done, they can take 20 trips, and then stop to catching and releasing. When they catch their fish, they're done. Quit putting lines in the water, catching fish and releasing them. I also would like to see the citations gone away, so they'll quit fishing for them big cows and killing them before they can breed. And then on the commercial side, in recreational, come April, when them fish go up the river to spawn, make them illegal to possess until the fall. That way you're not killing them up there after they're already wore out.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Ernie.
Ernest Badge in the state of Virginia. I'm president of the Eastern Shore Working Watermen Association. And I am familiar with the whole plan. I've read everything. I'm familiar with the compact. I'm familiar with everything about ASMFC, and you're not living up to any of it. When you go back, you went to 2017, but before 2017, we had an addendum in 14, which reduced the commercial catch by 25%. Recreational was supposed to achieve the same reduction, 25%, through reduced creel limits and things. Virginia is one of the few states that has a very short season, 120 days. Most states have no closed season. Maryland has a very short one, and so does Potomac River has a little bit longer than Maryland. But the commercial sector actually in 22 was down a little bit, an insignificant amount, but it was down a little bit. It contributed nothing to this at all. You're supposed to use the best signs available. The best signs available tells you the problem is in 22, somewhat Maryland, but New Jersey was 25% of the catch. New York was similar. Massachusetts, you had 2 or 3 states along the coast. It's not really fair to punish the Chesapeake Bay, which is the biggest producer of fish, and lands about 9%. Massachusetts actually has way more and produces none. So you're into that. You know, you're supposed to take in a lot of different things that you don't take in according to your charter. You're supposed to think of socioeconomic. You did on the for hire sector. It's 2 paragraphs into your, not this, but into the main thing. The commercial sector is 1 line. Talks about it may be reduced in income because of reduced quota, and it may lead to higher prices. You know, that's really not taking in much into consideration. It's just making a statement. So the commercial quota from 2014, when we took the first reduction, to now is down over 30%. If you run the recreational numbers from 2014 to now, they're actually up a little bit. They achieved no reduction whatsoever from 15 till last to 22. They went down for a few years, and then 22, like you said earlier, it was a gigantic increase. So it's easy. If you're gonna use the best signs available, you need to tackle the problem where the problem exists. The problem exists in the ocean, the problem exists north of us, it doesn't exist in the Chesapeake Bay, it doesn't exist into the recreational fishery in the Chesapeake Bay, it doesn't, the commercial fishery along the coast has been very well managed. Any overages have to be paid back, regardless if it's a one-time, you have to pay it back. Virginia is very strict, and we go over very much. We have individual quotas, they'll take our license. So, people are very careful in Virginia not to exceed the quota. So you really need to take in all the stuff that you're supposed to do. This is just, I'm having a reduction, you should have one too, even though it's no problem. We didn't cause the problem, we shouldn't be part of the solution. You're never gonna have a solution if you don't address the problem. And when Rob O'Reilly was still here, he suggested about having closed seasons, and Robert Bill told him no, that wasn't gonna happen, having closed seasons in the Northeast. So until you get realistic and actually address the science, what it tells you to do, and do something, you're not accomplishing anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
We got Mike, let's go after him.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Mike Quinnen. I'm an attorney with Thompson McMullen in Richmond, Virginia. I represent the Twin Rivers Watermen's Association and the Virginia Watermen's Association. The principal concern of the watermen regarding Draft Addendum 2 is that it provides an option for further reduction of the quota limit on commercial fishermen that has already been unnecessarily and unfairly reduced. To the extent that the striped bass population is overfished, the problem is clearly and solely the result of recreational fishing and not commercial fishing. This fact has been demonstrated and is evident from the draft proceedings of the ASB Management Board's meeting of August 1, 2023. As the plan review team reported, and these are quotes from the draft proceedings of August 1, 2023, quote, most removals are coming from the recreational sector. Quote, total recreational removals account for 90% of all removals and total commercial removals for 10% of the removals. Quote, dead discards are 1% for commercial. For recreational, it was 51% for harvest and 39% for release mortality. In the initial draft of Addendum 2 that was presented to the board, the proposed measures appropriately focused on the recreational fishery. The only measure that was not limited to recreational fishing was an option to implement a maximum size limit for commercial fishing. The board later modified Draft Addendum 2 to add the possibility of commercial quota changes. According to the ASB Technical Committee's memorandum of September 28, 2023, page 5, the reason for doing so was not because reduced quotas would benefit the fishery directly, but instead was an attempt to account for the implementation of the maximum size limit. This is a quote. To attempt to account for implementation of the maximum size limit, quote, by calculating an adjusted quota that will keep a state's commercial impact on the overall spawning potential of the stock the same under the new size limits, so that these quotas are conservationally equivalent to the commercial quotas under status quo regulations. However, the technical committee notes that there are numerous sources of uncertainty for this analysis, close quote. The technical committee also had these things to say about a maximum size limit. These are all quotes from the technical committee report of September 28, 2023, page 5. Quote, the technical committee raised concerns about the implementation of a commercial maximum size limit as a management tool. Quote, implementing a more uncertain management option that is designed to have no effect on overall stock productivity increases the uncertainty around the rebuilding probabilities and the impact on the stock without having a positive impact on overall stock productivity. There is an increased downside and no upside to implementing this management change from a technical analysis. So, the only reason an option for reducing commercial quota was even proposed was to adjust for the impact of maximum size limits, but the impact of imposing additional size limits was recognized by the board's own technical committee be uncertain and negligible. Consequently, before the board published draft addendum 2, it eliminated the option for a change in the maximum size limit. However, it did not eliminate the option to reduce the commercial quota, which makes no sense and now has no basis in the record for reducing the commercial quota. Commercial fishermen and recreational share a common interest in the size and vitality of the striped bass population, both in the short term and in the long term. The fact is, however, that increased quotas on commercial fishermen would have a negligible impact on the health of the fishery, but a devastating impact on commercial fishing, specifically on the lives and livelihood of commercial fishermen. The watermen of the Chesapeake Bay who rely on striped bass to support their families may be commercial fishermen, but they are not industrial fishermen. They are a historic and integral element of the economy and environment of the bay. They have learned to survive on small margins that their boats and their backs provide. Further decreases that to their already reduced quotas, in particular, pose an existential threat to their way of life. The recreational fishermen will always be there, but if the small and family-based culture of commercial watermen in the Chesapeake Bay goes away, chances are it will not come back. The watermen and all of the commercial fishermen of the Chesapeake Bay greatly appreciate your consideration of these comments. Now, I have some comments that Doug Jenkins, the president of the Twin Rivers Watermen's Association, asked me to read. Doug had planned to attend tonight, but he's under the weather. So, these are Doug's words. Since the ASMFC started cutting our quota, we have lost around 60% of it. Now you are suggesting another 15% reduction. A few more years of cutting our quota, we won't have one. I think that is what the states north of the Chesapeake Bay want. Their goal is to end the commercial rock fishery on the bay. We were told that the Chesapeake Bay produced 90% of the spawn on the Atlantic coast. Yet, once the fishery was open again for harvest, the northern states took the majority of the rockfish harvest on the Atlantic coast. The charter, which is supposed to regulate this fishery, is being ignored. It states in the charter that any management plan must consider the social and economical impact of the fishery on those that have benefited from it in years past. Over the years, I have talked with some of the people who have served on the ASMFC representing Virginia, and they all tell me the same thing. The northern state representatives do not listen to them regarding Virginia's fair share of this fishery. The citizens, recreational and commercial fishermen, are being robbed of natural resources that we protect and grow out for harvest. The MRC, the Secretary of Natural Resources, and the Governor of Virginia need to arrange a meeting with the Secretary of Commerce to stop this dictatorship that the northern states use to control our striped bass fishery. We can and should manage, Virginia can and should manage its own striped bass fishery. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. Who's next? Come on. Somebody turned it off.
Good evening. Thank you for listening. I'm a private citizen and not a fisherman. After listening to your speech, first thing I'd like to do is change my vote to status quo for commercial fishermen. What I have to say is more about the health of the bay, and it definitely impacts striped bass. The most recent State of the Bay report was a grade D-. By everyone's account, Virginia waters are suffering. There's pollution, warming temperatures, invasive species, and management issues that have all led us to this point. We've been doing this kind of thing for decades. I mean, I remember just go out in the bay in the 70s, and there was people, taking a lot of striped bass back then. If you're gonna hold striped bass fishermen accountable, then you need to hold everybody accountable. You were saying that striped bass are in an emergency and book in decline, while at the same time, you've increased menhaden reduction fishing quotas over the last 2 years by 20%. Striped bass are the environmental reference point for menhaden stock status. By your own accounts, they are the most sensitive game fish to the availability of menhaden. So why, in the most important striped bass nursery, are we not discussing menhaden depletion? ASMFC and MSC continue to tout the Atlantic menhaden fishery is not overfished. I would stipulate that that statement in broad overview is correct, but at the same time it is also misguided. The fishery, as certified, covers 350,000 square miles, the entirety of the Atlantic coastal waters from shoreline to 200 miles out. But the Cook reduction fleet is taking all of their fish from a tiny area of less than 2,500 square miles, concentrated in Virginia waters and just off the coast of Maryland, Delaware, and New Jersey. This area represents less than 0.75% of the total certified fishery. A true accounting of this fishery really needs to be based on a spatial explicit approach, excuse me. Menhaden have a direct effect on the health of a striped bass fishery. As of December 1st, the NOAA Catch Data Report shows total landings of Atlantic reduction fishery at 114,000 metric tons, 14% below last year and 28% below their quota. As we have seen from looking at marine and air traffic data, the Cook fleet has been working overtime and weekends looking for menhaden. They are having a hard time finding them. They take every school they can and they're still struggling to come anywhere near their quotas. We do not need a $2 million VIM study to tell you that menhaden population is suffering. You already know that from your own empirical data. ASFMC is at cross purposes with your mandate. Your website states the Commission is committed to ensuring the stability of Atlantic coast fishery resources. Healthy and vibrant resources means more jobs and more opportunities for those that live along the coast. Every economic impact opinion I read that states that there are more benefits and jobs derived from other industries that depend on healthy menhaden stocks than there are from reduction fishing. Why are you continuing to be beholden to this antiquated and destructive industry over the needs and desires of your own citizens? The people who oppose reduction fishing support the sustainable resource management of bait fisheries, commercial seafood fisheries, aquaculture, and recreational fisheries. We are not anti-commercial fishing. We are anti-industrialization, anti-ecosystem destruction. Thank you for listening and for your service.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to allow that one because it was a menhaden, but I don't want people going on and on about menhaden. This is about the amendment, Addendum 2, and what your thoughts are on that addendum, okay? But I'm glad somebody brought it up, but let's move on.
Okay,
It wasn't me.
my name is Brian Collins. I'm from Alexandria, Virginia. And I just briefly spoke with you yesterday. I didn't announce my name, and I spoke with you, Emily, briefly. And I heard what you just said, but I want to make the point that my feeling is the Addendum 2, if you call it that, I forget the technical terms, is deeply flawed because it doesn't include the forage fish considerations. So right now we know there's 112 million pounds of menhaden quota in the bay, and another 236 million pounds that can be caught at the just outside the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. My feeling, and I've shared this before, but I know what we voted on is we should probably have a moratorium on all striped bass fishing and probably menhaden until we can figure this out. But I think it hurts the credibility of ASMFC to not include menhaden in the consideration. I think it's a little, I take it offensive to stick all the blame on recreational and commercial fishing when we have documentation that overfishing of menhaden has reduced the striped bass population by about 30%. And I appreciate the comment over there about ecological reference points. There's a consensus in ASF, Atlantic State Marine Fisheries Commission, that there's a high correlation between menhaden and striped bass. That's their favorite food. We also have osprey in decline. I don't see how the public can have faith in the process by ignoring industrial fishing. At least say we've studied it and industrial fishing isn't the problem. And I think that would help a lot. I'd say, like, how can we incorporate industrial menhaden fishing into our overall plan? I think everybody wants to see that. It's kind of like, you know, if you take I heard the gentleman say, and I think it's true, you read there, I think, you know, you can get into a debate about what percent of the East Coast striped bass are in the Chesapeake Bay. The number gets as high as 90%, and they spend 9 years of their life in the bay. It's like a little aquarium, and we're taking all the bait fish out of the bay and at the mouth of the bay, and then we have our experts in fishery science telling us, look over here, the real problem is the hook and line fishermen and the commercial guys. And it's like, nobody believes that. I mean, that's ridiculous. It doesn't work well. And I think, at first I thought it was incompetence, and then I thought it was industry buying off everybody, and then now I see maybe it's bureaucratic. That the menhaden fishery managers don't talk to the striped bass fishery managers. So we need that correlation there to work together. And I'd just like to say, I'd like to see, ask, how can we, this is a comment, not in the question section, how can we integrate industrial fishing for menhaden into the overall strategy plan to save the striped bass fishery, which is crucial to Mid-Atlantic, Virginia, Chesapeake Bay, Eastern Shore, Northern Neck, economy, jobs. It's crucial. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Just real quickly, the ASMFC's Atlantic Menhaden Ecological Reference Point Stock Assessment does take into account striped bass. So it's not a silo for each one. It's in there.
Well, what I'm wondering is how come it's not in this plan then for managing the striped bass if it's a key factor?
Because it's in the Menhaden plan.
Well, we're talking about, but it's not in the striped bass plan.
It's in the Menhaden plan.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking is happening is the two plans don't merge together like they should. They're fenced off, which is not working.
The plan takes, the Menhaden plan takes into account striped bass as a food, as a predator, and it's adjusted accordingly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
What are the comments we have?
Hello, my name is John Forrest. I'm from Gwynns Island, Virginia. I've had a striped bass permit since the moratorium was lifted, whenever, a long time ago. And when the ocean permit became available, I got that because I qualified. Because I was usually fishing in the ocean. There was a reason for that, because trying to gill net rockfish in the bay is a nightmare. There's a lot of junk in the bay, and the ocean was a lot cleaner. There was a problem. In the ocean, you had dogfish, so you have to fish a big enough net to get away from the dogfish. So my original ocean permit gave me a number of tags, and under those tags, I caught about 7,000 pounds of striped bass per season. Didn't take long to do it either, because there were a lot of striped bass out there. When they came out with, in Virginia, they came out with a poundage quota per permit holder, and that reduced my quota to 49.96, so 5,000 pounds. A few years later, they asked us to do a voluntary 3-year reduction that was going to be restored after that 3-year period. And we all did it because there's only 25 or 30 ocean permit holders, and we all know each other. And we agreed, okay, we'll do that. And they promised they were going to restore those fish. They never did. And we said after a year, he said, "You think we'll ever get those fish back?" I said, "No, we'll never get them back." So now that's the quota. And then they do a reduction from that. So now I'm down to like 3,500 pounds. So I'm catching half what I could catch before. You're going to punish commercial fishermen who are not violating anything, have already been reduced at least 50% since this started, for something that we have no control over at all. We're being punished for someone else's crime, basically. That's not fair. It's not the American way either, is it? Really? Anyway, on the recreational side, I can think of a couple of things that solve this. One thing, we should have a uniform size limit for everybody. And I suggested this to Jack Travelstead years ago. Minimum 24 inches, max 36, solves a lot of problems. Then they said that would never fly, because we're gonna have this, where the guys enforcing the rules don't even know what the sizes are. They gotta look at their book on how'd you catch it, when did you catch it, where did you catch it, all that stuff. It's ridiculous. The other thing is, you could reduce a lot of the mortality from the recreational fishermen, especially if you made them use barbless hooks. I mean, recreational fishing is supposed to be recreational, sporting. It's actually, you can, if you're a skillful fisherman, barbless hooks work fine, release the fish unharmed. There's people who do that voluntarily. They banned treble hooks a few years ago because of people snagging cobia and spade fish and everything else, woodfish. But, I don't know. It's, he's right about managing the fish. As each fish individually managed, they eat each other. You can't manage them like that. The reason we have no trout is because we have so many rockfish. The rockfish ate all the trout. Seriously, the bay is full of rockfish, and they don't leave until they're about 8 pounds. So, when the moratorium lifted, the way I understood it, I went to the meetings, it was supposed to be a 50-50 split between recreational and commercial. Half for commercial, half for recreation. You have to realize, so in Virginia, there's like 8 million people. There's 100,000 recreational fishermen and there's 1,000 commercial fishermen. The commercial, we don't eat the fish we catch. We make them available for the 7.9 million people who don't go fishing, sport fishing. They're not wealthy enough to do it, or they're too far away. What about the people who live in Blacksburg or something? You think they're gonna drive all the way to the ocean to catch one fish and drive all the way back? Makes no sense. But, I mean, at the rate we're going, if you get the quota, individual quotas are so low that you can't justify. So I have a boat that can catch, that was designed to catch a certain amount of fish. Now I can catch half that many fish. I don't need that boat, right? So I've got it, I have to use it. The cost to operate it is the same whether I catch one fish or 2 fish. Or if I can catch my entire annual quota of rockfish in one trip, one day, and throw fish away, because that's how low the quota is now, the individual quota. The other thing, the promise was, when they reduced us that one time, they were supposed to increase the commercial ocean fishery by 40% because they had made our quota too low to begin with. They never did that. Then they gave us a cut after that. Anyway, this is the first meeting I've come to in this building because I used to come to them, but I never accomplished anything. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, if nothing else, coming in this building, you didn't have to talk behind a big pillar. It's a nice open building. So, are there any other comments? Kelly, I'm going to save you for last.
Yeah, that's what I want.
Okay. Okay, any other comments?
Just, I agree with what most people have said. I haven't come into this building really. I used to come to the old building a lot. I was involved with fisheries management with a conservation organization. That was years ago. Just an emotional comment from me. I'm old now. And my son grew up here. We look forward to this time of year, November through February. It was just the thing we did. When he moved away, he'd come back from college, we'd fish for striped bass. I don't fish for striped bass anymore. I've got grandkids out there in Oregon where he lives. They'll come back and catch a couple of cobia or something in the summertime. We go out there for Christmas. That's the primary reason. There just isn't a fishery here. So, as restrictive as you can get and be fair, that's basically what you need to do.
Can you state your name, sir?
I'm sorry, Larry Snyder from Hampton.
Thank you.
You go to Jeff now.
I'm Jeff Dean from Alexandria. I would like to see something in this to crack down on illegal fishing. I've been coming to these meetings as long as you've been on the planet, I guess. And I've heard recreational fishermen talk about coolers on their friends' docks that they catch their limit, dump them in these coolers, and then go back for another limit again. I've seen commercial boats with the tags not secured in the fish so they could be reused again. I think you need to do something to crack down on illegal fishing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, is anyone else who wants to speak who hasn't had a chance? Not seeing hands, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Place.
Yeah, we have a few things. Emily, I didn't know that was you. I've spoken with you a lot on the phone and on different webinars, so it's nice to see you out here in the Old Dominion in person. One person mentioned ITQs to get a hold of the recreational overages, which seem to be endemic, chronic, every year. I won't go on about the ITQs, except for to say there are many recreational fisheries around the world. I was keeping up with those in Australia on several different species 15, 20 years ago. They went to IQs, not ITQs, but IQs. So it is something to look at because it is a way, I think that's one reason that the commercial has had so many underages is because of that way of tracking fish. On the addendum we're looking at, I do want to sort of follow up on what Mr. Bowden and Mr. Quinan said as far as the ASMFC compact and the charter as it pertains to this. It is true that the initial allocation was supposed to be 50-50 when the first, I think, was Amendment 4, Amendment 4, that's how long ago it was supposed to be 50-50. Over time, because of the inequitable way that a lot of the various management measures have been imposed on the various sectors, there's been a de facto reallocation of quota to the point where we were talking about 90%, 10%. I did just look a minute ago at Table 6. Do you have Table 6? Can that be put up, Table 6 from the plan?
I can put it up in just a minute.
Sure. And I'll just speak to it as you're getting ready to get up.
Yep, go ahead.
The way I read Table 6 there, that 90% versus 10% as far as the landings of the two sectors has now got a greater discrepancy, which is 91% and 9%. It looks like, in fact, there were about 680,000, I think that's in fish, there were about 680,000 fish. I have to look to see if that was pounds or fish. It may have had both. Whereas there was over 6.8 million fish or pounds. I have to look to see if that's fish or pounds, but the equivalent of the recreational was over 10 times. So that means that instead of having 10% of the catch, the commercial would be down to around 9%, maybe a little less, which is a little bit disturbing since we've been serving with our underages as the buffer for the overfishing that's been taking place chronically. Also, I want to bring up Figure 5. Maybe we get a chance to look at that too in the document. Total removals by sector. And that's a real simple graph. I think it's about 30 or 40 years, and it shows basically, graphically, the total removals recreationally, both through discards, more discard mortality and landings, as well as the commercial landings and discards. What I did not realize until I looked closely at that graph in Figure 5 is that we are continuing, and that's kind of why the percentages have been going down even further than the initial agreements and all the previous amendments. If you look carefully, there's been a steady decline in the percentage of the total removals by the commercial. It's ongoing. Yet there was in 2022, there was a dramatic spike of the commercial removals. Yeah, that's Figure 5 that I'm speaking to right now. So if you look there, it goes up to 2022. The two colors at the bottom, and I am colorblind, so I'll probably see it differently than you, but the two colors down at the bottom, you can see there's been a gradual decline in the percentage of total removals attributed to the commercial, whereas just recently, there's been a sharp spike despite the fact that the management measures that have been taken recently, it looks like because there's a decline in commercial, the management measures to reduce the amount of fish being taken have really only been satisfied by the commercial. And that's gone on since was that 1994, 1992? That's been going on for decades. And so it's a de facto reallocation contrary to what was agreed upon when they opened the striped bass fishery. But I wanted to bring those two tables on there. I was just getting ready to write down one other figure. I think it's figure 1. Since you've got figure 5, I went to table 6. Maybe you could look at table 6 before we go to figure 1. It's further down in the document, I think. Yeah, which is, what is that entitled? I can't read
So
it.
this
Total
is-
removals by sector, right?
Right, total removals by sector. So this first column here is commercial harvest, about 600,000 fish last year.
Right.
Commercial discard, second column, then recreational harvest, and then recreational release mortality.
Right, and that's in numbers of fish.
Correct.
And I would take exception, I'm not gonna do that now, but the 81,200 of the commercial discards, if you look at that as a percentage of the amount of landings, it's far in excess to what I ever saw commercial discards. Historically, commercial discards were like 4%. That seems to be more than that, but either way, take it as it is, and it would suffice 680,000 pounds almost exactly. Whereas if you add the two forms of removal from the recreational, it's over 6.8 million. That's why I earlier mentioned that it's gone down from a 10%, 90% allocation, because we seem to be the only sector that's complying with the efforts of management to reduce the catch, to reduce the F. We're down to 9%. Actually, it looks like it's a little bit below at 9%. So I'm just doing that in my head. You can come up with the precise numbers, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that in this time when the recreational fishing mortality is spiking, ours has been on a steady decline. And it's kind of a model fishery, and I kind of congratulate people. It's been managed in a model way. This also on, I think it was figure 1 that I was going to get you to bring up on the spawning stock biomass. It looks to me, I'm just curious if there's something in figure 1 there. It has spawning stock biomass and recruitment on the bars are recruitment, and the colored graph is the spawning stock biomass. I don't know whether we'll ever hit those glory days when it was up to above 250 million pounds, and there has been a bit of significant decline in previous decades, but I don't understand, in the face of all the new restrictions, both commercial and recreational, why has there been such a sharp increase going into 22 of the recreational mortality, because we've seen the exact opposite from the commercial. So all these things sort of fall under the no good deed will go unpunished. If I go out here and drive out and have a car wreck, my insurance is going up, but I don't expect others to pay for it. So it may be an imperfect analogy, but it is kind of awful for year after year over the decades for us, even though we're under our allowed TAC, to be penalized further and further for overages from the other sector. So I'll leave it at that. I do have a lot of other comments, but I'll submit those in writing to you guys. Thank you.
Okay, I lied. We have one more. Chris said he was going to be late, so Chris is going to have the last word.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for allowing me to speak. Yeah, I guess I left my phone in the truck. It doesn't matter. I've got the notes committed in memory. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Two things I want to focus on. The first is a charter fishery. I want to say that I was a participant in the past. I held a charter license. These recreational changes are going to hit a charter industry that's already been hit hard. Maryland's had a trophy season for the last 5 or 6 years. Virginia hasn't had a trophy fishery season in 5 or 6 years. We have no charter fishery. The charter fishermen have been put out of business, yet Maryland has kept on fishing. The explosion of charter operations in the Northeast, I'm talking about from New Jersey north, is beyond comprehension. How many people in the charter operations in Jersey, you can see the pictures. I can get you all summer long, from May till September, just wearing them out. Dead discards right and left, and yet Virginia, charter fishermen have been out of business for 6 years. So they got to get a handle on the explosion of not only recreational fishing, but their charter industry in the Northeast. And I'm talking about north of Jersey, New Jersey. Now, as fact, on the matter of the commercial fishery here in Virginia, we continually, and I think Kelly sounded like he alluded to some of this or probably spoke directly to it, we continually, take the brunt of this. In 2019 and 2021, Virginia took on measures, changes in season, changes when we could target fish, gill net size reductions. A lot of these weren't even necessary under the ASMFC requirements, but yet our state, under Governor Northam, at the behest of other conservation groups, took these measures. This is why we're not catching our quota. It's not because we can't fish, don't know how to fish, or there aren't fish to catch, but we've lost fish because of a successful plan to reduce our effort, especially on big fish. So we've done what they've asked, and yet we're going to get penalized again. This is unfair. It's ludicrous. It's really unfair. And again, it's the northern states just want us growing fish for them. They want this Chesapeake Bay to be one big rockfish factory for them, and it gets old. Flounder, same way. We've done this for years. Anytime they go over, they take it from us, and we carry them, once again. So here we are again on striped bass. We're going to do the same thing. Virginia's going to get hit under Governor Northam, not by my encouragement, but we took a lot of stuff, reductions that we didn't have to, trying to be proactive. I told them we wouldn't get credit for it then, and we're not getting credit for it now probably. But this is why we're not catching our quota. We're doing what they wanted us to do, targeting smaller fish, and what do we get for it? We're going to get beat down again. It's not fair. It's not right. They need to look north. Even now, right now, the unbelievable fishery that's going on off of Barnegat Light and north of there. And then all summer in Massachusetts and New York, the dead discards, fish floating, the fish that went to the bottom, sharks eating them. You look on Instagram. All you got to do is look on social media. If you're not paying attention there to what happened this summer and last summer in the Northeast, the fish moving north, that's not my problem. Is I'm asked to pay the penalty, just like Kelly said, for other people's overages, and this is not fair. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right, that concludes the comments, and now do you want to show the written part, if they want to provide written comment? I know some of you are basically reading from your comments, but if you want to submit them as well, you can submit them online there. And if you didn't speak tonight because you don't feel comfortable, that's why we have an opportunity to do that. If you send it to us, we'll make sure it gets to Emily in time. And to let you know, in the January ASMFC meeting, which is in Arlington, Virginia, it's on January 24th, Wednesday the 24th. I think it's from 1:30 to 4:30 in the afternoon. Is when they're going to be discussing this and probably voting on the final measures. To let you know, our commissioners, Jamie Green is our commissioner. He's our administrative commissioner. I am his proxy, so I'll be sitting at the table along with Senator Bill DeSteff, who's our legislative commissioner, and Brian Plumley, who's from Virginia Beach. He's our governor's appointee. So you can reach out to any one of us and voice your concerns. And as Emily said earlier, there's 3 of us, but we only get 1 vote. So we try to the 3 of us will try to come to some consensus at those votes, and it's like, and we usually do. We're usually pretty good about that in our state. At this point, if there's nothing else from anybody, I got to read this last statement. Sorry, guys. As a reminder, you have to have your comments in by 11:59 on Friday, December 26th. So if it's 12:01,
22nd or 26th?
the 22nd.
Gotcha, I thought I heard.
That's what it said. The commissioner's website and the document itself has instructions for emailing and mailing you comments and contact information for commission staff if you have any other questions. So Emily's your contact there. Thank you for coming to the hearing tonight and for providing your comments. There was a lot of good suggestions. A summary of tonight's hearing will be provided to the Striped Bass Management Board for consideration at the winter meeting. We tape all of our meetings live, and you can go to our YouTube station and watch it afterwards if you miss something, or tell your friends they can go listen to it there. I think we had about 14 people listening online. And if there's nothing else, this hearing is now closed, and wish you all a nice and happy holidays and prosperous 2024.
Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it. Hi, sure. I had you on my list. Fine, perfect. Thank you, Dale. Appreciate it. Thanks, sir. Right.